Well, may the fourth be with you. In honor of Star Wars Day, I decided I wanted to defend a film that I think is unreasonably overrated and equally underrated into all hell. Now, before I start explaining why, I want to make it clear that Episode 8 is far from a perfect movie. It has some massive problems, and those problems are hard to overlook, but I do think that the things that The Last Jedi does well far outweigh the bad things. So before we talk, I just want to make it clear that there are equal good and there are equal bad. Well, probably not equal, but there are a lot of good, and there are some pretty bad things in this one. Now, I'm going to start with the things that I don't like, and then we'll go into the things that I do like. The big one, lack of planning. This section will be pretty brief because this is an issue that plagues the entire sequel era, not just The Last Jedi. So I will potentially make a part 2 that will be a little bit more about all of the other sequel movies. I do think that The Force Awakens and The Rise of Skywalker are equally properly rated. I think that Rise is atrocious and all the hate towards it is completely valid. And I think Force Awakens is appropriately rated. I think it's a little underrated, but it's far from the disaster of Episode 9. I think the highs in 8 are a lot higher than the highs in 7, and the lows in 8 are not nearly as low as the lows in Episode 9. Unfortunately, the entirety of Rian Johnson's vision came to fruition, meaning that anything that was set up in 7 was completely thrown away if he didn't think it had a place in his movie. Same thing with the things that people didn't like in 8 were equally ignored in Episode 9, which I think was another massive misstep by Disney. Important characters like Finn were totally sidelined, even though he was the most interesting character in the last one. Finn essentially has the exact same character arc as in The Last Jedi, but a lot worse, which brings me to the next big problem. Finn and Rose's section of the movie is almost unbearably terrible. There is zero reason for Finn to have his character literally backtracked. In The Force Awakens, he knows that war is a bad thing, and his character arc is learning to not run away from that war. He starts out in the beginning witnessing atrocities, and he knows that atrocities are bad. He doesn't need Rose to be sitting there explaining to him why Rose is bad. Rose serves as narrative redundancy and causes him to go through a backwards character arc. He learns things that he knows by the first 2 minutes of Force Awakens. He literally says,
"On my first battle, I made a choice. I wasn't going to kill for them."
Rose spends the entire movie babying the audience, telling us things that we already know. We are 8 movies plus Rogue One and at least 2 TV shows in at this point. We do not need to be told that war is bad. Finn does not need to be told that war is bad. The entire movie is self-contained and less galactic ending stakes, but again, due to the lack of planning, as mentioned before, we don't know much about the Resistance or the First Order from the previous movie. We know that it rose from the ashes of the Empire, and we know that the Resistance is basically the rebellion. But we don't know why the New Republic doesn't have its own army. We don't know why they aren't funding the Resistance, or even if they are funding the Resistance, we don't know why they don't have a complete, organized, proper military. The Resistance should be extremely well funded, and the First Order should be closer to the CIS in the prequels. Since it's not the dominating force in the galaxy, there is zero reasons they should be able to fund a super Death Star, dreadnoughts, and the Supremacy, which is by far the largest capital ship of any fleet in Star Wars. Even if they had, we know the CIS was funded by Count Dooku and a combination of large-scale corporations that formed their own Senate. The Empire just lost a war and should not be more stocked than the Resistance. The Resistance should be more in line with the Clone Army. Although I'm not saying they should use clones, they are probably not wanting to have another Order 66.
Order 66.
This kind of conflict needs to be explained before the last movie, so it has to be done in Force Awakens or Last Jedi. You have the perfect opportunity with a character like Poe. Have someone like Poe, who likes to fight and blow stuff up, argue that if the New Republic wasn't so busy trying to prevent the Empire from rising again by not creating a large and well-rounded military, that they ended up causing the First Order. Poe would argue with someone like Leia, who has firsthand seen the atrocities and the power of the First Order / the Empire. In scrapped story ideas, Leia was intentionally going to be the new Supreme Chancellor, and I could see her trying to be an opposite to Palpatine, who instead of creating a large army for practically no reason, she would decide to not make a large army and rely more on local armies and small governments. That would prevent a large-scale clone army wiping out the Jedi like originally happened in the prequels. This needs to be a conflict in the sequels, and it needs to be said out loud, not just implied. A lot of these things are in external media, like the books, where they explain that the First Order was hiding the Outer Rim. This needs to be explained in the sequels to show why the Resistance has to exist. They could make so the New Republic doesn't want to create an army and doesn't want to cause problems with the First Order as to not have a large galactic scale conflict, which they have had 2 in the past 100 years. They would want to not do that again, but the problem is that needs to be explained and not implied. A lot of the sequels hide behind ambiguity to make the viewers make their own interpretations of what's going on. That kind of storytelling method is lazy and it causes problems. And if we go this route and have two characters explaining why the Resistance has to exist, that would tie really good into the theme we have of Luke Skywalker and Kylo Ren, which we will get into later. The Force Awakens is the intro to the new generation. Use The Last Jedi to explain the ins and outs of the world that desperately needs explanation. But no, instead, we spend the entire movie on horse races. Finn is the perfect happy medium in between Leia and Poe's extremist tendencies. Leia has seen firsthand what the Empire is capable and wants to prevent it from happening again, no matter the cost, and that prevention ended up the New Republic being undefended and unprepared for the First Order, committing terrorist attacks all over the galaxy, while Poe thinks having a large, well-rounded, extremely powerful military would be able to have them fight the First Order. But having that powerful of a military and that powerful of a government is what caused the corruption we saw in the prequels and caused Palpatine to rise to power without any kind of backlash. Luke and Leia's narrow-minded ideologies are literally explained in The Last Jedi, but it's only in the context of the Jedi and not the Resistance/New Republic. Like I said, Finn would be the happy medium in between these two ideologies. As a stormtrooper, he's seen the first-hand atrocities of the First Order and would want to prevent it as much as anybody else. But he knows being unprepared and unable to fight would cause the First Order to roll over the galaxy and no one would stand in their way. Finn is the perfect way to utilize the idea of gray versus black and white, which is the main theme of this film besides failure. The entirety of Rey and Luke's story, along with Kylo Ren, is the idea of black, white, and gray, which again, we'll get into when we get into the Luke section. All in all, this kind of conflict is ripe storytelling, and simple changes like this would have made people like it way more. A lot of people say that this is a problem because it's inaccurate. While it is scientifically inaccurate, Star Wars has always been scientifically inaccurate, and there's no reason for a movie about sound in space, space wizards, and other things like that should be a problem if a ship flies at light speed and blows stuff up. Now, this does, however, break world building. If anybody with a hyperdrive can ram into a space fleet and blow it up, there's zero reason for them to build a Death Star when they can just fly Star Destroyers into planets and blow them up. It'd probably be cheaper and a lot easier. I don't think Ryan understood how hyperspace works. In Star Wars, you don't go at light speed. You go into like an alternate dimension and you pop out where you want to go. So I don't think the hyperspace kablamo scene was a good addition. However, it did look really cool, so I'm willing to give it the slide. Now, Leia flying around like Superman is not an issue by itself. Star Wars has always been doing weird stuff. Anyone remember this shit in The Phantom Menace?
Let's go.
Let's not act like people would complain about that if it was in this movie. But we also don't want to act like killing off legacy characters off screen is a good idea. Ryan, my brother, I understand you want to subvert expectations, but if you don't want to piss people off, don't kill Admiral Akbar off screen. That is the perfect way to piss people off.
This is outrageous. It's unfair.
This one's going to be talked about a little bit later because I think a simple rewrite of this would solve a lot of the problems. I like how Holdo has a secret plan. However, I do think it's stupid for her to not tell her crew that. Especially, she needs to tell Poe, who is literally causing problems and threatening a mutiny. She should be telling everyone, or at least a couple of people who she trusts about the plan, not just Leia. Leia knows Poe, and knows Poe is not going to cause problems if he knows the plan. But Holdo completely justifies Poe in taking over the ship because it sounds like she's just leading them to their deaths. But that kind of blind trust is not something Poe would do, so simply pulling him to the side and say, Poe, look, buddy, we have a plan. Just trust the process. We're going to go over to a secret base. Don't cause a space mutiny. It's going to cause a lot of problems. Hint, hint. We're going to talk about a spy later, and that would cause a lot of plot fixes.
I am relieving you of your command for the survival of this ship.
Jokes. While I do think the jokes are a little excessive, some of them are kind of funny, and I do think the sheer amount of them is narrative whiplash, because this movie is about failure and about how it treats people. Hell, the entire plot of the movie is about a small group of rebels being hunted by a space regime, and if they run out of fuel, they die. But the second they pull out a your mom joke, I feel that's a little bit narrative whiplash. However, this joke was pretty funny. Now it's time for things that I like.
Destiny.
I think that The Last Jedi has some of the best writing in the entire series, bar none, and it's not even close. I don't want to overhype it, but I really do think the highs of this is some of the smartest use of the Star Wars mythos that I've ever seen. Starting with the Force Skype calls. I really do think that the Force Skype calls are very underrated. I do think it's weird that they've never been mentioned before, and they do need some kind of explanation besides I bridged your mind. But I do really like how it lets our main characters talk to each other without killing each other, because it really does show them being alike and not alike while not having them be in the same room. It lets them talk without breaking the canon of Kylo knows where Rey is, because it really would be narratively different if they didn't interact face to face. Plus, I like the idea of Snoke being able to read their minds, and that goes into the subversion of him killing Snoke. In The Phantom Menace, they tried to use midichlorians to explain why the Force exists and who makes it happen, but people complained about that because it demystifies the Force and shows more of an understanding than I think would be the best for the series. But the scene with Luke and Rey exploring the Force makes it mystical again. I love the whole scene of them sitting on the rock and then going through the Force while not saying midichlorians even one time. I like how Rey knows the dark side exists, but she doesn't assume that good can be evil. Rey starts out in the movie with this narrow-minded naivety where she thinks that anything good is good. Rey wants to know where she comes from, she thinks that's a good thing, and so she doesn't think that a bad thing could give her that kind of knowledge. Kylo is on the other side of that coin. He didn't go to the dark side because he couldn't resist it. He went because his teacher failed him. They show two different ways of going to the dark side, whether it being the only thing that you know or having a bad teacher. The entire theme of this is failure and how we learn from it. There's literally no better way to explain this than having two characters who are essentially the same character with the same master, and they still go in different directions. I've already talked about Rey a little bit, but I do really think that Rey being a nobody is a refreshing change of pace and a perfect narrative opposite to Kylo. Every single main character in Star Wars, as of right now, has had some kind of crazy bloodline. I guess Anakin was the start of that bloodline, but every single character that's strong to the level that the main characters are have been Skywalkers, or at least related to some kind of powerful legacy character. Her innocence makes her the perfect medium, and she ends up teaching Luke along with Yoda that failure doesn't make you a bad person. Her and Yoda teach Luke that sometimes heroes stumble and fall, and attempting to talk sense into Kylo because she knows that the tiny bit of light is enough to bring him back to the light. Rey being a nobody and her perfect naivety innocence is the perfect foil for Kylo and Luke. Luke's diversion and Kylo's stubbornness caused our heroes to fight another day, and that kind of stubbornness that Kylo has is his main character flaw. He believes that anybody with the Skywalker name and anybody who's a Sith or a Jedi has to be a bad person. It's like that theme that we talked about with Finn earlier about black and white. We'll talk about Luke in a minute here because I really do think Luke is the best part of this movie. But Kylo's stubbornness is the perfect foil for Rey's innocence. And also, people who say she's a Mary Sue have clearly never seen a Star Wars movie before. Anakin blows up a CIS mothership when he was like 8 years old, but apparently Rey beating an already injured Kylo in a 2v1 and lifting some rocks makes her a Mary Sue. Star Wars characters are always good at stuff they shouldn't be good at if they have the Force, and I really don't want to hear her being a Mary Sue. When Luke blows up a Death Star, Anakin blows up a CIS mothership without ever having any kind of training at all. At least Luke had shot swamp rats. Anakin should never have done what he did. Side note, anyone who says that Kylo wasn't injured is an idiot. First of all, you see him pounding on his chest to try and get the blood out. I'm not sure what his goal was to get the blood out of his body, but that does show he was injured. And he got shot by Chewbacca's bowcaster, which has the Force to hit people and do this. Anyone who says that Kylo should be fighting at full strength is also an idiot. Next thing I really like is the visuals. Anyone who says the visuals are not good is dumb. Guys, come on, like look at these shots. These shots are so good, and I don't understand why people don't like them. All the sequels have really good visuals, and I think they're completely slept on. All right, it's time for the big one. Luke Skywalker's portrayal in this film is divisive, bold, and has something to say that I've never seen in a Star Wars movie, ever. Luke's portrayal is something that people grossly misunderstand. I am going to mix Kylo's things in here too, because I really do think that Kylo's story and Luke's story go hand in hand, and it'll be easier to talk about them together, because their character arcs are the same, but also backwards, and it's really, really cool, and I really think that people misunderstand what Rian Johnson was trying to do. Now, I do think that Luke's portrayal is not for everybody. Luke's portrayal is different than any other portrayal we've seen of him, even in things like the Battlefront 2 games and the Book of Boba Fett, which I know a couple of those came out after this movie, but I really do think that that's how people wanted him to act in this, but that's kind of the point. When Kylo says, I'm a monster, part of him wants to say that Luke made me the monster. You can see it in his eyes, deep down, that he knows that Luke meant well, but he believes that getting rid of the Sith and the Jedi is the only way to make peace.
The Sith, the Jedi, the rebels, let it all die.
And this would really reinforce the idea of the New Republic and First Order being two sides of the same coin and Finn being in the middle. Having our two main characters in the middle of the good and the bad is the perfect way to differentiate it from the prequels and the OT. Complained that The Force Awakens was too similar to A New Hope, but the second Rian Johnson does something different and bold, people complained about it. And I really do think that Star Wars fans will never like anything from Star Wars unless it's the exact same while also being different. It's an impossible mindset and an impossible standard, and I really do think if people opened their eyes to this kind of relationship that they would see how well written it is. Again, I really don't think it's perfect. There are problems with it. Luke being the level of cynical and practically sociopathic that he is very different from the way he's portrayed in every other medium. And I really do think that I like that the way that he handles Kylo is different from the way he handles Vader. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. But Kylo wants to take down Snoke and use his power to reshape the galaxy. No Jedi, no Sith. The expanded novels and any character description you get of Kylo, you do see that Kylo is not a Sith. He's a dark side user, but him being not a Sith and not a Jedi is literally the point. Destroyed the Sith when he brought balance to the Force. Kylo is not a Sith. Kylo is a Force user who doesn't like the Jedi and doesn't like the Sith. Ryan was a little bit more straightforward with this idea. I really do think that people would have liked it better because he's not undoing Anakin's sacrifice. This also goes back to Luke. Luke and Kylo almost want the same thing. They both want to get rid of the Jedi and the Sith because they think that the way that they were formed and the way that they interact with each other is toxic and it causes problems. Luke blames himself as the culprit for the creation of Kylo Ren. Because let's be real, he is the main reason for the creation of a new Darth Vader. Luke was so narrow-minded in preventing the return of the Sith that he did the exact same thing that Obi-Wan and the rest of the Jedi of his generation did. So focused on preventing the return of the Sith, they let the dark side users slip right under their noses. Darth Vader was created because of the narrow-minded hypocrisy of the Jedi. People misunderstand Anakin's turn by saying he only turns to Darth Vader because of the death of Padme. Well, that's not true. Anakin turned because of a level of hypocrisy that the Jedi parading around all throughout their reign. The Sith and the Jedi are almost the exact same.
The Jedi are similar in almost every way.
Leia trusted Luke with her son, and Luke blames himself for the fall of Kylo Ren. Kylo killed the other Jedi students because he saw that the Jedi were the problem. He saw Snoke as a way to a new order and a way to have a new galaxy that wasn't bounded by the Sith and the Jedi. And then once he saw that Snoke was no better than the Emperor or Luke, he killed him. People wanted Luke to act the way he acts in the Battlefront 2 game or in the Book of Boba Fett, which I know didn't exist at this point, but you understand what I'm saying. A wise sage who's a perfect Jedi, but in that kind of narrow-minded way.
Damaged innocent worlds.
And that narrow-minded way of thinking is the exact reason that the Clone Wars happened. Order 66 only happened because the Jedi thought the Sith were gone, and they thought that Anakin would never turn to the dark side because he was the chosen one. Mace Windu, Yoda, and all the other members of the Jedi Council were representative of them being so attached to tradition and so eager to stay in power that they didn't even notice that Anakin was struggling. An attachment, keepers of the peace, not soldiers, even though they're all literally generals in a galaxy-spanning war. Luke tried to prevent this from happening again in the exact same way that the Jedi of the generation before him did it. He shutting down his emotions and believing that kindness and virtue and that kind of pure, narrow-minded mindset is the only way to prevent Darth Vader. And then the second that he saw that it wasn't working, he tried to kill him. But it was for a split second. People think that Luke went totally evil and tried to kill an innocent child, but that's literally the point, is that he was so focused in preventing Darth Vader. I know I keep saying this, but he was so narrow-minded and focused it that he almost made a big mistake, but the difference between him and Anakin is that he realized that it was wrong and he stopped himself. But the damage was already done, and in preventing Darth Vader, he created Darth Vader. He tried to stop it. He tried to make the move that would have saved the galaxy, but he ended up causing the literal reincarnation of Darth Vader. And he literally says as much in this scene with Rey.
Become, for the briefest moment of pure instinct, I thought I one could stop it. It passed like a fleeting shadow.
Luke wanted to prevent a second Vader, and that's a flaw in his character. He cut himself off from the Force, knowing that he wasn't worthy of it.
You've closed yourself off from the Force.
He almost did the exact same thing that Anakin did. Luke and Kylo Ren both turn into Darth Vader for a split second. It is the coolest thing I've ever seen in a Star Wars movie. They use the idea of Darth Vader and the idea of Luke being a living legend as a weapon against Kylo. This is good writing. I really don't understand why people don't like this more.
Did you do it? Did you create Kylo Ren?
And with consequence. And the last thing I saw were the eyes of a frightened boy whose master had failed him.
I have failed you, Anakin. I have failed you.
Luke has a character arc in this film, and he realizes that the next generation of Jedi has to be taught not just the good, not just the bad, but all of it. Look at what Yoda tells him.
The greatest teacher failure is.
Luke goes from a wise sage who believes that the Jedi are perfect and that he can do no wrong, as you see in Battlefront 2 and in the Book of Boba Fett and even in The Mandalorian.
Why'd you help me? Because you asked.
I really do think that this is a good way to portray Luke. I really do think that this is in his character to be this kind of like wise sage who believes that everyone has good in them. But the second that he saw bad in Kylo and he saw that nothing he was doing could stop it, he went too far and tried to stop it himself. The prevention of Darth Vader created Darth Vader. And finally, I really do want to talk about his death. Luke's death in front of the twin suns is one of the most impactful death scenes I've ever seen in not only Star Wars, but in any movie ever. It perfectly mirrors the iconic scene in the franchise when he stands and looks at the twin suns. He reaches the apex of his power, dies saving the Resistance, and all without lifting a finger. Anyone who says that Luke died like a little bitch is an idiot. Let's be real. This is a misunderstood character decision. Luke is equally the hero of this film as well as the villain, and I really don't think that people understand that. If people saw him and he pulled a Yoda and trained Rey with no problems, people would complain that it was the same movie as Empire Strikes Back. But him being equally the villain as well as the good guy is so smart. Anyway, I really talked about Luke too much, and I really do think that people need to rewatch this with this mindset. But, you know, it is what it is. Finally, here's a couple things that I like and dislike, as well as a couple of rewrites that I think would make it a lot better. Like I said, hiding the secret plan is stupid. But there's a secret change you could do that would make this better, as well as improve a character that people already hate, Rose. Make her a secret spy, have her sister be like an insane rebel fighter, as you see her on the bombers, and have Rose secretly working for the Empire, or the First Order, sorry, you know what I was saying. Have her be a secret spy, but make it so that she can't communicate with the First Order, because that obviously would cause problems. There has to be some rewrites, but if you make her a bad guy and have Holdo know that, that would make so she wouldn't want to disclose the plan, because she wouldn't want the secret spy finding out about their secret plan. She doesn't have to know that it's Rose, but if you make it so that she knows there's someone hiding and could give information to the First Order, that would make her want to prevent her being caught. And that would make people like Rose a lot more, because if you have her go on this little adventure with Finn, secretly planning to betray him and report him to the First Order once they get to the ship, but then have Finn explain to her the horrors of being a stormtrooper, have her change her mind, and have her be the one to sacrifice herself to take out the battering ram. This fixes so many problems, and I really think that people would like Holdo and Rose a lot more. Obviously, like I said, you have to tweak the script a little bit to make it make sense, but I really do think making Rose almost a sympathetic bad guy would make her having a sacrifice good, as well as not ruining Finn's sacrifice. People say the choreography is bad in the throne room, and I do think that there's a couple miscues. People who are complaining about this are forgetting this is the same franchise with this. And Rey isn't meant to be a pro fighter with her saber. She's brand new, and Kylo's choreography is really not that bad. As I said before, I want more things that explain this world. For all the faults of the prequels, we know exactly who the CIS is, how they got their funding, why they're fighting, and Sidious and Dooku's relationship and their role in the story makes sense. The First Order get almost no explanation in any of these films, and we really should know at least this before the final movie in the trilogy. So I really do think that we should get more explanation on where the First Order came from, how they got their funding, who was leading them before Snoke showed up. And finally, I really do think that Phasma should have gotten more time to do something. She has a really cool design and a cool voice, and her having a battle spear is really cool, but no, she gets thrown into a trash compactor and then thrown into a hole, and it's really dumb. And then I also, this is a little nitpick, I would have liked a longer interaction between Luke and Leia. I understand that that would have probably been narratively redundant because them interacting in the base is really cool. I just would have liked a little bit more. In conclusion, I really do think The Last Jedi is overhated to all hell, and people grossly misunderstand Luke's character as well as Kylo's character. But there are a lot of problems with this that I would have liked to see changed. Please, for the love of God, rewatch this movie. I really do think that if you rewatch it under a different mindset and ignore the Canto Bite stuff, this movie's really good, guys. I promise. It's better than the prequels. You can fight me in the comments, and I will talk about the prequels in another video if you would like me to. But give it a rewatch. Anyways, bye.